Hi everybody, it's great to be back here again tomorrow. It's Friday. If you look in the back, right over here in the back of me, you'll see this brick wall. Right now, we never did a filming over here, one of these Torah lessons with this background, so enjoy it. This is a new project that I've been working on. As a matter of fact, the reason I haven't been online for the last couple of weeks is that we're involved here in a little addition. My wife's dream was to have a new kitchen and put in, so we decided to expand on our porch a little bit the house. And I got backlogged. Anyone who does any kind of physical work on their home knows that it doesn't happen too quickly. It takes time. And in reality, the last 4 months we've been dealing with this project here, but it's worthwhile when all our family, the grandchildren, can come in and sit down and have a beautiful Shabbat, a beautiful family get-together and friends get-together in a normal, beautiful kitchen. My wife's dream come true. But as she always says, it's not her dream, it's the family's dream. We all have to appreciate, of course. And anyway, so this is the reason that I haven't been online for the last couple of weeks, as I mentioned. The background has changed, that's the reason, and I'll show you a little bit more of the kitchen. So I'm going to move over. This is really the living room, but I'm going to move this camera to the right a little bit. You'll get a chance to see and tell me what you think of it. There we go. Whoa, way back there is the kitchen we're working on. Hasn't been finished yet, but should be done. God willing, this week everything should be finished. But anyway, let's tighten that up there. So with that good excuse for not being online for a couple of weeks, I'd like to get down to a Torah lesson. This week, again in Israel, we are reading Matot. In America or abroad, you're reading Pinchas. I'm going to try to combine both portions a little bit and mentioning a concept I saw in the Chalban, one of the great Kabbalistic rabbis of our generation, and add some of my own thoughts together to build a understanding of these portions. I'd like to begin in Genesis. And Genesis talks about, if we look at Genesis 4, it's a story, famous story of Cain and Hevel. Cain kills Hevel, the first unfortunate tragedy of history, or one of the tragedies, but that's the first mentioned murder in history, and a very painful story. And what was behind that, we see the Torah talks about Cain being a man of the field and Hevel being a man of the sheep, a shepherd. And what happens is that Cain brings his offering to God, which was a meal offering, and Hevel brings the choice, the first of his flock, of his sheep, a fatty portion, something really special as an offering, and God accepts the offering of Hevel and does not accept the offering of Cain. And the question is, we know that there is something going on over here. Cain ends up killing Hevel, etc. In Hebrew we say Cain. But we have to look into the philosophical dispute that went on between the two of them. Now, I say philosophical because it's interesting. Obviously, the Torah doesn't reveal what was their argument that they had, or what was the disagreement, but in reality, it's brought down, as I mentioned before, and the Chalban talks about, there is some kind of philosophical understanding of how things work that begins right here, how the world works. And if you look at Cain, he looks at really the external is less important than the internal, almost irrelevant. And he focuses on the external the internal aspects of a person, and letting go of the external. And therefore, he wasn't too interested in what kind of offering. He felt in his heart the connection to God is the most important thing. What does it make a difference of what kind of action I do? So he brought something very, very cheap and something not at all on the level of Hevel, because he didn't think that the external mattered. Hevel, on the other side, he thought that not only the internal, obviously is important, but it's also important how external actions we do. And this was really, you can say, a philosophical argument of the two of them. I want to show how this particular way of looking at things in life takes us all the way up to this week's portion in Pinchas, and of course in this week's portion, Matot. If we look, very interestingly, in the works of the Ari HaKadosh, one of the greatest Kabbalistic Kabbalistic writers of all times, teachers. Aliyah Kadosh, he didn't really write himself, his student, the Chaim Vital, actually wrote down everything that he received from his rabbi in the last, whatever year or so of his Ari's life. But whatever it was, the Aliyah Kadosh teaches us something very interesting. And he has one book that he calls the Book of Reincarnation. And he says that Cain, later on, was reincarnated into the soul of Korach. And Hevel was Moshe Rabbeinu, was Moses. That was Hevel. Interesting. If we look later on, we see how Korach follows the same pattern of sort of ignoring the external aspect of things and looking only on the inside. How do we see this? Korach came along with an interesting statement, and what does he say? He says, Kulam Kedoshim, everyone's holy. Why does Aaron and Moses think they're holier than thou? We're all holy. God gave a nation of holy people. Every human being is holy. So what makes you better than we are? And that's what Korach was claiming, that everyone is on that level. But in reality, the mistake that Korach made, and he was supposed to come along and try to rectify the sin of Cain. So he was sort of reincarnated from Cain, but he rectified what he did. He followed the same pattern of looking at the internal, saying everyone's holy, it doesn't make a difference, these external divisions of things. The most important thing is the inner side. But it didn't work because God wanted him to rectify, and he didn't do that. But if we follow that same pattern later on, and we're going to take this Korach to Parashat Pinchas, and if we see in Parashat Pinchas something also very interesting, we see that Pinchas was in a struggle, right, against the leader of the tribe of Shimon, of Simon, which Zimri, we know the terrible act that he committed together with Kozbi Batzul, and he allowed himself to, in front of the entire congregation, to have relations with this Midianite woman. And again, being the prince of Israel, the disgrace was very great, and Pinchas, of course, reacted the way he reacted. Pinchas himself was a reincarnation of Cain. That's what our rabbis teach us. And he rectifies, finally comes along, and he rectifies the external as well as the internal. We'll see how that happens, which is very interesting. Because something very strange goes on over here. We see that Pinchas, or Phineas, I don't know the word in English, we see that he is granted by God the gift of priesthood as a result of his act of zealousy. And usually we know that priesthood is supposed to bring about what? Priesthood is supposed to bring about peace and love and kindness. That's really the source of priesthood. It is the priest that is supposed to look at someone, the inner part of somebody, and see their interactions and see how they're behaving, and not focus on the external actions. But here we see that Pinchas was sort of acting like a judge. Now, how does a judge behave? A judge, he behaves externally. Why? Because he has to see the actions of a person, and based on a person's actions, he comes up with a judgment. A person damaged someone's property, has to pay. Doesn't mean if you didn't mean to damage it, but you damaged and pay for the thing. So a judge really works on the external side. And Phineas was looking at this action of Simon, and he did what he did, an act of zealousy. But that was an act of judgment. So why did God grant him the gift of peace and the priesthood he got from this? So in reality, Pinchas represents both sides, because he's not only looking at the external, but he's also looking at the internal. Because when you realize that the nation, his nation of Israel that he's trying to rectify and uplift, is a nation of holy priests. Just like Korach said, we are a nation of holy priests. But of course, with divisions, and with everyone have a special function of what to do. And Pinchas's reaction was to say this is not suitable for someone like the prince of a tribe to behave such a way. It's like a diamond falling in the dust. It doesn't mingle. A rock fell in dust, no one would pay attention to it. But a mineral like a diamond, you jump and take it out and clean it off and not let it get dirty. So someone who's like the head of a tribe of Israel, to fall so low, Pinchas had to rectify. That's what he looked to rectify. And this really was the antithesis of Cain, who kills Hevel. Right? Because here, he's looking at the external actions as something that is important. On the other hand, you could look at that act, and what's the difference? You can say, here is the head of a tribe of Israel. Why can't he go ahead and take this Midianite woman? It's all an external act. What difference does it make? It's nothing. On the inner side, everyone's holy or whatever it is. But in reality, Phineas was teaching that lesson, that there was a very important moral code externally that one must keep. And you can't avoid and not pay attention to the external things, just as you must pay attention to the internal things. Both are important. Sometimes it seems like there are people in the world that are more concerned with what's going on the inside, and there are others that are concerned with the outside, and they like more of the people that are like judges, and others like love and kindness, always look for the good in somebody. But in reality, we must combine both worlds. We have to always look good for somebody, always look for the benefit, look for the good things that a person has done. We can avoid the external actions which are so important. And that's why in reality, in Judaism, our focus is on both sides. We focus on the internal. When we know who we are on the inside, then it demands our very high level of ethical behavior on the outside. And that's why it's so painful when you see people that are on a high level do such terrible things. And that doesn't go together, and that's why it has to be rectified. So finally, when Pinchas comes to the world, the Aliyah Kadosh discusses how he has rectified the sin of Cain who murders Hevel. Here, his whole murder of Hevel we spoke about was an act of because he grabbed the hold of the inner and not the external, it led to murder. How does Pinchas rectify this? By acting in zealousy, killing in zealousy, but which is a very unusual one-time thing, but that act of zealousy came from another place. So the bloodshed that he spilled, blood, which was again a very hard thing to understand, but it came from a different place completely. It came from looking at the external and saying it must be equal to the internal. You cannot, someone so precious can't destroy the precious, high ethical nature of the people of Israel. And here, the head of the tribe fell into that trap, and he had to rectify that. He was therefore granted by God priesthood. In reality, we only have like one or a couple of small cases of zealousy in history, and this being the reason because it requires a tremendous high level for a person that puts every bit of his personal ego and pride aside, and he acts only for the sake of God, and that's very rare that a person is on that level to do so. Therefore, on a regular basis, one is not allowed to act in zealousy. One can't just take the law into his own hands. He has to go to court, etc., etc. That's an important thing to put aside and mention that. And we've spoken about this in our previous lessons. If we look on the other side, we can actually look at the head of the tribe of Simon, again, Zimri, as saying to himself, you know something, the most important thing is the internal. And he sort of wanted to rectify and take Cosby with him. And saying, there's nothing wrong with this, right? Nothing wrong with this kind of thing. So he was sort of following the philosophical way of Cain and Korach, continuing that same line that was rectified. I thought of bringing it up to this week's portion, Matot here in Israel, an oath. So it opens up with oath, what we say. When a person says something, right, is a reflection of what he actually believes in his heart. And therefore, in so important in the Torah's eyes and in Torah teachings, in Jewish law, is when someone takes an oath, he has to go ahead and abide by his oath and not, again, go against what he said. Not, what's the word? He would say, mefer, nullify his oath. Person has to do what he says, basically. Right? Nullifying is another word which I shouldn't mention here. There is a way of nullifying an oath when you go to certain sages, or a husband can do it for a wife, father for a daughter at a certain age. nullifying an oath and making it not considered like if you catch it right away and nullify it. Or going to sages and then asking them to nullify the oath for you. But in reality, I'm talking about not fulfillment, the lack of fulfillment of an oath. A person takes an oath upon himself. He must fulfill what he says, the power of speech. If you decide to do something and say it, you have to do it. Now why? It's showing that it's not only, the inner, but it has to do, once you say it, it relates to the external actions. And therefore we can avoid relating to our external actions. And it sort of connects with this whole concept we spoke about of trying to unite our external with our internal, and both worlds have to function together like that. In reality, everything in life, you can say, is really based on these concepts. We must always look for the good in somebody and work internally. At the same time, in everything we do, we must also make sure that our external actions reflect our inner essence at the same time. And that's really the great lesson of what an oath is all about, and it's one of those kind of things I mentioned in the Torah, that the threads that connect the entire Torah. And this is one of those threads. You can look and find it all over the Torah. External actions that are physical actions combined with our internal being, our spiritual side, combining both worlds together. And God willing, we will continue to rectify Cain and Korach and show how our actions are going to really live up to our internal beauty that we have. Everyone in the world, as not only the nation of Israel, of course, the entire human being that God created, every human being in the world, is of course very, very special, that God created the human being, and it has a purpose. And a person can't live only on the inner side. The entire world has to rectify themselves as well and live up to their function that God placed them on this world for, and follow and do what they are meant to do in this world. And everyone has their purpose. Everyone has their purpose. And that really, I think, is the lesson of Parashat Pinchas, Parashat Matot. There's a lot more to it, of course, but God willing, we'll save it for another time. Have a wonderful Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom, B'Sorot Tovot, Yeshuot Nechamot.